workers. Don't let the media punk you into thinking you have to do what they do to have what they have.
Dr. Tony Evans talks about the importance of paying more attention to our heavenly treasure than our earthly possessions.
This has everything to do with how big the bank account is up there versus how big it is down here.
This is The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans, author, speaker, senior pastor of Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship in Dallas, Texas, and president of the Urban Alternative. Dr. Evans believes that the antidote to our earthly worries is a heavenly perspective, especially when we're anxious about our finances. Let's join him as he takes us to Luke chapter 12 for today's lesson.
Jesus tells a story to the crowd. A story about a man who wanted Jesus to redistribute the wealth so that this man could get an inheritance from his brother. Jesus then tells him the parable in verses 13 through 21 of Luke about a rich man who had gathered all of his profits together in order to retire early and enjoy the good life from his business success, only to hear the words, "You fool, tonight your soul is required of you. And now who will own what you have accumulated?" Then Jesus broadens the application and says, so is everybody. This doesn't just apply to the person I was talking to or the rich man I was talking about. It applies to everybody who is. So is the man or the woman who pursues treasures in this life and is poor toward God, have no wealth in heaven while they seek to accumulate wealth in this life or the things that wealth can provide. So now Jesus has turned from the crowd to his followers. He's now not talking to the masses anymore. He's told them the story. He wants to apply it to his followers, those who claim him, those who claim to follow him. And his message is very simple, and so is mine. He repeats his message over and over and over again. And his message is, if you decide to live your earthly life with an eternal perspective, don't worry. Look at what he says in the middle of verse 22. Do not worry about your life. Look at what he says in verse 25. And which of you by worrying can add an hour to his life? Look at what he says in verse 26. Why do you worry about other matters? Look at what he says in verse 29. And do not keep worrying. And then look at what he says in verse 32. He calls on worry's cousin and says, do not be afraid. His message is, don't worry. I know what I just told you, disciples, shook you up a little bit because I told you to be rich up there. And I'm telling you now, if you're rich up there, you won't have to worry down here. That the antidote to worry is a heavenly perspective. Now, there is a lot in our world to worry about. And yet Jesus has the audacity to come on the scene and to tell you and me, for this is written to his disciples in verse 22, stop it. He says in verse 23, the reason you should not worry is life is more than food and the body is more than clothing. We worry about whether we're going to eat. If you really want to worry about something, worry about whether you're going to be alive, because if you're dead, eating is inconsequential. Worry about the bigger thing, not the lesser thing. He says that life is greater than food and your body is greater than the clothes you put on. So if you just got to worry about something big, not something secondary. So he shifts our perspective about the priorities in life. One of the fun things I get to do and love to do, because it helps me, but it also seeks to help the person who's talking to me, is when they come to me when a resource has failed. I had a brother, he was in the first service. He called me this week to tell me that they downsized his company and he was laid off. His resource failed him. He's got a family. What is he to do, since that was the place where he was looking to do what he should do as a husband and father? And one of the joys, I just love doing this, is to say that that resource was not the source, and your source has many resource options available to him. So don't you worry that a resource failed when, as long as you are plugged into the source who has multiple resources, you are not limited to the failure of no worms in that job anymore. But without a heavenly perspective, when that one resource seems to bail out on you, when the worms in this location are no longer findable, but because you have gotten rich in heaven, you are operating with an eternal perspective. All God has to do is shift locations to a new resource. He says, study the ravens. Don't just watch them fly. Do an exposition of them, because if you study them, you will not see them fussing, cussing, or complaining. They're not losing it. And even though you're more valuable, they may understand it better. The ravens, they don't have CDs, mutual funds, or 401ks. But they do have a source. And that source covers them. And are you not more valuable than they are? He says, consider, study the lilies of the field, the beautiful flowers. How they grow, they neither toil nor spin. They have never taken a sewing class. The beautiful flowers have never gone to buy cloth, or have never gone to a paint shop to give them their brilliant color. But I tell you, not even Solomon in all of his glory clothed himself like one of these. He says the beauty in nature comes because of the color coding of the Creator. Magnificent colors blending into one another, brilliant. For many of you ladies here, consider your roses that you should have gotten. He says, Solomon in all of his glory is not arrayed like that. And that is the God who is responsible for you. Verse 29. And do not seek what you will eat and what you will drink, and do not keep worrying. For all these things the nations of the world eagerly seek, but your Father knows that you need these things. He says, don't go crazy over the physical. Go crazy over the spiritual. Because your daddy knows what your situation is. Notice he says, your father, not their father. The Gentiles is thus the unbeliever. He says all these things the unbelievers go after. They break their necks ignoring the spiritual in order to accumulate the physical, no matter what it is, whether it's money or health or power or whatever it is, that's substance and significance. They go after that. He says, no, you go after me because your Father knows what you need. Okay, let's get something straight. It doesn't say the Father knows what you want. It says the Father knows what you need. Don't get punked by the Gentiles. Don't let the Gentiles punk you. Don't let the co-workers, don't let the media punk you into thinking you have to do what they do to have what they have. Don't get punked by the Gentiles. Because they will paint this picture when they're the ones spending all the money on the medication in spite of the stuff that they have. Don't be punked by the unrighteous. Your father knows where you are. He knows that situation. He knows that source that's gone left on you. Because I know that. Many of you know that it's come up a few sermons that I don't eat fish. I don't eat fish. My father was a longshoreman, a stevedore. He unloaded and loaded boats that came into the Baltimore harbor. Many times it would be months before he would get a call to come to the docks to do it. But my father had to feed his family. And one of the ways he did it was he would go fishing and catch fish using nets. And the fish he would catch was herring. Hundreds of herring. He'd have to give some away so they wouldn't spoil. The neighbors stopped liking fish. We had herring for breakfast. That's called fish and eggs. Herring sandwiches for lunch. Herring and vegetables for dinner. And herring and ice cream for dessert. It was just herring everywhere. But that was the best he can do to make sure that his family was fed because there was not money in the house. And so he did what he had to do. I remember sometimes I'd see my father on his knees saying, Lord, show me how to provide for my family. But because he was rich in heaven, God would come up with ways on earth to meet the need until the job opportunities opened up again. He would turn fish and sardines into Moby Dick sandwiches so his family would have something to eat. Now, if my earthly father, limited education, limited skill, limited opportunity, made sure his children got fed, and you have a heavenly father with no limitations, owner of creation, and you question whether he's going to meet your need? He says that's an insult. That's because you're poor up there. And because you're poor up there, you have little confidence in what he's going to do down here, and you've confused the source with the resource. And so what do? We've been punked by the Gentiles, so we try to follow their pace down here and wind up poor, spiritually and otherwise.
So how do we build up our spiritual wealth? Dr. Evans will come back in a moment to tell us when he continues this message from his series, The Eternal Perspective. This brand new collection will give you a whole new angle on living, working, loving, and serving by helping you see the big picture that pulls all the pieces of your life together. Along the way, you'll discover deeper reassurance, build your confidence, and sharpen your focus on what it means to live a rich, eternal life. Request it right away, and we'll send you all 10 CDs in this brand new collection as our gift when you help support Tony's work with a contribution of whatever amount God leads you to give, large or small. The title again, The Eternal Perspective. Just visit us at tonyevans.org to get the details and make the arrangements before time runs out. Again, that's tonyevans.org. Or let one of our resource team members help you day or night by calling 1-800-800-3222. That's 1-800-800-3222. Well, right now, here's Dr. Evans with more of today's message.
To live in worry, he says, is to live like the heathen. Okay, so what do you want us to do, God? What do you want us to do? Verse 31, but seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. The word kingdom means rule, authority. Come underneath his rule. And I love this phrase. Do not fear, little flock. A little flock is a flock of sheep. Let me tell you about sheep. Dumbest animals God ever made. A sheep that wanders from the shepherd is a fool, thinking it can make its own way. It's going to be eaten by the wolves. And that's why we often get eaten by the Gentiles. Because we leave the shepherd. He says, chill. It's going to be all right. Fear not, little flock. Because sheep are scared. They're scared. They want to know, am I going to survive if I make this decision to prioritize the spiritual over the physical? If I'm rich toward God and make that more important than being rich among men. He says, if I do that, remember, this has nothing to do with how much money you have or how much money you don't have. This has everything to do with how big the bank account is up there versus how big it is down here. It has to do with the eternal over the physical, the spiritual over the temporal. He says, fear not, little flock, for your Father has chosen gladly to give you the kingdom. Wow. Wow. You see that word? Gladly. It just tickles him to death. You know what? It just makes him, he just be laughing. Your resource has went left on you. You want to know, what's a man going to do? How am I going to make it? Because your resource went left on you. But if you are rich up there, if the eternal has been prioritized and positioned on the front end and not just on the back end, he says, it is your Father's joy to give you the kingdom. That is, that which the kingdom offers, that which heaven disposes to earth, if you are rich toward God. It's hard to do a withdrawal from a bank you haven't made a deposit. Everybody wants to come to church to withdraw from heaven when there is nothing in the account, and heaven looks at it and says, bounce. So what are you to do? Interesting statement at the end of verses 33 and 34. Sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven, where no thief comes nor moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Now this one is easy to miss. Because I know verse 33 just shook up some folk. He says, sell your possessions and give to charity. I just shook you up, didn't it? The second half explains the first half. He says, do that which has eternity tied to it. Okay? So being of benefit to others, that's why Luke 6:38 says, whatever you need, do that for somebody else. Give and it will be given back to you because you just made a deposit in heaven. That's why God talks about him being first with your time, first with your talents, first with your tithe, first. He keeps talking about being first because he says, then you position me as priority. So this is not just about money, it's about ministry. And he says, you do this first and you have built up an account from which withdrawals can be made. And then he gives the clincher. Oh, and it's a clincher because it's so misread. He says in verse 34, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now let me tell you how most people misread that. They misread that to say where your heart is, your treasure will be. That's backwards. It doesn't say where your heart is, your treasure will be. It says where your treasure is, your heart will be. Translation, your heart follows your treasure. See? So you don't have to have a heart right now, but you get your treasure right and your heart will bing, it will pick up on it. Okay, if your money is in Bank of America, somebody robs Wells Fargo. Well, you're going to hate that there's a robbery, but you ain't going to get all shook up. Because it ain't got nothing to do with you. That's got to do with the person sitting next to you who got that stuff in Wells Fargo. But if your bank is in Bank of America, you catch the criminal and all that, but you cool. You're not shook up. You're not worried because you don't have any treasure at Wells Fargo. Now, if you find out that they robbed Bank of America, all of a sudden you're going to be all shook up because they messing with your money, honey. They done got all up in your grill. They all up in your stuff. If you're invested in the stock market and the stock market takes a deep plunge, that's going to go, whoa, that's my 401k. Your heart's going to be shaken because your treasure has been messed with. Okay, let's make it a little bit more relevant. Let's really bring it home to something most of you can identify with. Most of you will be able to relate to. I know that what I'm getting ready to say will encompass almost everybody here right now to illustrate this point, and it is the lottery. That lottery bloomed up to millions and millions of dollars. People are buying tickets. Y'all were buying tickets. Get the lottery, the lottery, the lottery. And so every time it was time to show the winning numbers, you were right there. Because the dollars you used to buy the ticket to get the treasure controlled the heart. And when they started reading, Lord have mercy, if the first two numbers were like your card, ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. The heart's jumping because the treasure is in your hands.
Dr. Evans will come back in a moment with a story to help you avoid falling for that trick, so stay with us. First, though, I want to tell you about a special free resource we're making available today only. It's a powerful booklet by Tony called Eternity, Understanding Life After Death. This walk through Scripture will paint a clear picture of what heaven is like, who will be there, and what we'll be doing. If you've been imagining floating around on a cloud and playing a harp, you've got some great surprises in store. Get in touch with us and request your copy of Eternity, Understanding Life After Death. It's yours today, absolutely free, but only while supplies last, so don't wait. Visit tonyevans.org right away or call us at 1-800-800-3222. When you do, don't forget to pick up your copy of Tony's current 10-lesson series called The Eternal Perspective. Remember, this collection of full-length CDs will come your way as our gift when you make a contribution of any size, our way of saying thanks for your faithful support that keeps Tony's teaching on this station. Again, you can get all the details and make your request online at tonyevans.org. We also have members of our resource team standing by to help you day and night at 1-800-800-3222. That's 1-800-800-3222. Keeping your mind on what you're doing is usually a good idea. But tomorrow, Dr. Evans will explain why we ought to be focusing our thoughts somewhere else as well, as he talks about what it means to be a new creation in Christ. Right now, though, he's back with this final illustration to wrap up our time together today.
The boys went into the store and they took the tags off of the expensive clothes and put it on the cheap clothes, took the tags off the cheap clothes, put it on the expensive clothes. So people were buying cheap clothes and paying expensive prices because somebody had switched the tag. The devil has switched the tags on us. And he has made cheap what's valuable. The eternal perspective made valuable cheap. And so we choose the cheap just because he knows how to put a good sticker on it, a good coloring over it. God is not complaining that you've been blessed, that he's given you this, that, or the other. He just wants to make sure that you're more rich up there than you are down here. So when down here fails, you've got something to withdraw from up there because you're rich toward God and not merely seeking to be punked by the Gentiles.
The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans is brought to you by the Urban Alternative and is made possible by the generous contributions of listeners like you.